She had an inclination for heroism and a thirst for sacrifice. Her talent transcended language. The story of a girl from Krakow who dared to be the woman she wanted to be, to later become a 19th century icon on the American stage.
She modeled modern paradigms for us. She is solving the problems that are facing actors and actresses, and particularly women today, across the world.
She provides us with an archetypal model, how to build your own strong and unique persona and how to remain true to this image throughout your entire life.
There is something immemorial in human quest for excellence, and Modjeska is a perfect embodiment of it.
Something is going on around this experiment, around this story, that is bigger than the experiment itself. And I think with Modjeska, that's exactly the case. They're a part of this big sense of romantic return to the land.
I grew up mostly under the influence of nature, among the incidents of life and national calamities. Free, unrestrained, forming my own judgments of things blindly, innocently, adorning and magnifying them with my vivid imagination.
She was born into a tragic Poland, a country partitioned by 3 neighboring European powers.
Modjeska came from the southern part of Poland, which was a little more liberal than the other partitioned areas.
Modjeska was born with her mother's maiden name because she was illegitimate.
The rumor immediately spread in Krakow that Helena's father was Prince Władysław Sanguszko of Tarnów, and that he had built a summer palace not far from the Benda home in order to meet with Helena's mother.
There's all sorts of speculation about who her father was, whether it was in fact the person that her mother then subsequently married, Opid.
Michael Opid adored her. He was a source for her love of music and the classics. She would always refer to him as her father.
Music was my father's passion. He played with great feeling. And often during these tender passages, I burst into wail.
Her mother, I think, in many ways was much more important to her as a role model because her mother was a dynamo. She was a woman who had lots of kids, who was essentially a single mother because she was widowed twice. I mean, she was widowed very soon after she married her second husband. And she maintained her children on the rents that she had from her buildings. And then after those buildings were burned down in the Krakow fire, she had a coffee house. As Modjeska remembers her, she says, well, I didn't see a great deal of my mother. I mean, I knew my mother was there, but she was someone who ordered us, who organized us, and who was a woman of tremendous energy.
Here the trees and the stars taught me to think from the green meadows. The nightingales with their longing songs made me dream of love and beauty.
Prowadziła rodzaj takich dialogów z figurką Matki Boskiej.
She carried on a kind of dialogue with the Virgin Mary, a small figurine that stood across the street from her window. This, among other things, proved how excitable and dramatic she could become, how she could immerse herself and live in the world of her imagination.
This is where she learned about life and tenacity. She learned about discipline at the boarding school for girls and convent run by the Presentation Sisters. 4 years of education had to last Modjeska's whole life.
Modjeska's favorite half-brother, Felix, a popular actor in the Krakow theater, introduced her to the stage and facilitated her first audition.
After my first lesson, Madame told my brother that it was useless to teach me. My heart was sore, and this time my ambition for the stage was crushed forever. Or so I thought.
Ziemeyer, 15 years her senior, was brought into the household as a boarding family friend, later to become a teacher of German.
On one hand, he was still an attractive-looking man for her. On the other hand, he fulfilled the role of protector, a substitute father-like figure.
Modjeska had her children just as she was setting out on her career. And she had her children illegitimately. I mean, she had her children with the man who seduced her, but also the man who was her impresario.
It was Ziemeyer who made up the stage name Modjeska and managed her theatrical troupe as they travelled and performed throughout the provincial towns of Galicia.
In spring of 1865, a great sorrow fell upon me, and its blow made the world dark for me. My little daughter Marilka died. Blow after blow struck my heart and bruised it to the core. Soon I found myself free. My mother and my brother Felix brought me and my son to Krakow, and I never saw Mr. Modjeska again.
Without Ziemeyer, Modjeska projected herself as an ascetic devotee to her art, protected by and living with her family.
Really embarked on a complete rejuvenation of her image, and she was the extremely hardworking actress who was taking on hundreds of roles, literally, a year.
I wanted to attain the unattainable. It was not my destiny to die for my country, as was my cherished dream. Instead of becoming a heroine, I had to be satisfied with acting heroines, exchanging the armor for tinsel and the weapon for words.
To fight to the death. It was a Polish trait to never surrender. In her acting, she was fighting for Poland's freedom.
She was a working woman, and she was very, very ambitious. And so to reconcile being a hands-on mother to her son when he was young, and also to being a rising star, someone who was striving very hard to be a rising star, I'm sure was very difficult.
During one of the summer tours as a leading lady of the Krakow theatre, Modjeska met the distinguished young theatre critic Karol Bożęta-Chłopowski.
He was someone who was an aristocrat, at least by pedigree, but who loved the theater so much that he wanted to be a part of it.
Chłopowski was a person slightly cut off from reality, a bit of a dreamer, an intellectual.
He was a veteran who'd gone through this atrocious war that was completely hopeless. And then he was in jail, and he couldn't find his niche in society.
His courtship and proposal capped her efforts at making herself respectable.
He was doing a phenomenal thing for an aristocrat. Of course you're not going to leave the stage, because you're a great actress, and I believe in great acting, and I believe that you are the future of the Polish theater.
They married in 1868 and left for Warsaw. After her exceedingly successful debut in Warsaw, she was given a lifetime contract with the Imperial Theatre, becoming the Grande Dame, the highest paid actress in the history of Poland.
By the mid-1870s, she really realized that she had hit the ceiling of what she could do in Warsaw. She also realized that she was living in a fishbowl, and that her illegitimacy, her son's illegitimacy, and her husband's dependence on her earnings were all such public knowledge that was becoming fair game for people.
If I knew how to hate, maybe hate would bring me relief, but I am weak. My heart is only filled with tears and love, while I ought to have a brazen brow and heart of stone. If I could only fly away from here with my dearest ones and begin a new life of work and peace.
Her search for artistic identity involved also a political situation that surrounded her, and that's why I think she left Poland to go to America, which was a beacon of liberty, a country that in some way was akin to Polish hopes.
In 1876, accompanied by an unexpectedly tiny group of friends, a family member who was an artist, and a nurse, the Chłopowskis sailed across the Atlantic to the New World. The future Nobel Prize winner Sienkiewicz and friend Sipniewski had already gone on ahead to scout out a site for them.
California was the frontier. It was as far west as you could go. Even in that day, it was considered sort of a place where the crazies went.
It was here that Sienkiewicz discovered the manly virtues of the American pioneer.
California was a big drawing card. It was utopia itself, the center of the universe, or this is the place where the mystical currents all come together.
They discovered a successful farming community, unlike the larger surrounding plantations of California. and since most of the Polish colonists spoke German, they settled in Anaheim.
She wanted to have her own artist colony. She wanted to have painters and writers and actors have their own state.
An artist in a free country, a very modern idea.
They were not ready for the cooperative life, but they were certainly ready for the intellectual life. The fun it was to sit around the fire at night and talk.
Concerts were improvised on the farm, with Sienkiewicz reciting from his charcoal sketches, stories he wrote about Orange County life.
To cook under the sapphire blue sky, after a day of toil, and to play the guitar and sing under the moonlight, nearer to God.
We could call her a transcendentalist without any trouble. She didn't call herself that, but she fits into that pattern so closely.
But what she really liked about California was this beautiful nature, and so the side trips that they took were what hooked her.
That God was everywhere, that the Oversoul encompassed all of humanity. And the way to find humanity in the Oversoul was to go into nature.
After only 2 short-lived months, the Polish utopian colony in Anaheim had failed. Modjeska had to take her destiny into her own hands, and for the rest of her life be dependent on no one.
The plan to be on the American stage was always there.
Another reason she chose Anaheim was because of its close proximity to San Francisco. And San Francisco had 7 excellent theaters.
Leaving her husband to tend to the farm, Modjeska and her son traveled to San Francisco to experience some of the most challenging days of her life.
They didn't have any money, so she was pawning things. She did have the support of her son, but she hated to sort of expose her son to that poverty.
It was at this time that Modjeska met Joanna Tucholsky, the Polish daughter of a prosperous Jewish attorney, who tutored her every day in English. She would become Modjeska's constant inspiration and lifelong companion.
I would have my moments of doubt, but Joe was there, never allowing my head to droop.
But I would also say that Modjeska thrived on that kind of situation. When she was a younger actress, just starting out, she had what I like to call 2-dress happiness. She had only 2 dresses, which she could make up in different ways. And she loved it because she was learning all of her parts. She had almost nothing. It was a very Spartan existence. But she was up against the wall and she was going to come through.
She changed her name from Modjejewska to Modjeska for ease of American pronunciation. And in August of 1877, she debuted at the California Theatre in San Francisco in Adrien Lecouvreur.
The footlights cast their glow upon her, an ideal figure. Nobility in every posture and that womanly charm. The enchantment of that voice, deep from the heart. What happened when the curtain fell, I cannot even attempt to describe. Madness broke loose. It was America's reception by storm.
This was a role that she played very early in her career in Krakow, performed every time with great success with an extremely difficult dying scene. Portraying a dying scene on stage was a master feat, the height of an actor's performance.
I played and succeeded, and sent a dispatch to my husband consisting of one word: victory.
Modjeska then played Ophelia in her native Polish, partnering with McCullough's Hamlet in English. Polish Christians and Jews of San Francisco filled the theater.
They had not heard their native tongue spoken in public for a long time, and so they listened with indescribable weeping. It was like the music of angels.
A ja, nieszczęśliwa jak żadna z kobiet. Ja, która słuchałam płynnej jak miód melodii jego zaklęć.
Sienkiewicz wrote up a set of powerful reviews and immediately sent them back to Poland.
She's not selling out Poland. Look at what she's done. She's bringing Poland to the United States. She is Poland triumphant on American soil.
She was besieged by theatrical agents, critics, editors, and dignitaries at the Palace Hotel. Harry Sargent, one of the most popular theatrical agents of the day, arranged her first transcontinental tour across the United States. Within days, the news spread by telegraph all over America.
And the earthy reality of the immigrant experience, who is not at the top of the heap, but has to claw their way to the top of the heap, as Modjeska did, and so many of them did, touring in the Wild West.
Every time I went into the theater, I sniffed the air like a bottle house before a skirmish.
Every time she would debut and succeed in a new theater, I mean, her term for that was conquest. And so she conquered territory after territory, and that's the way, in many ways, she plotted her career.
But no doubt she was a hot babe in her day. For her to go into someplace like a mining camp, where you got a bunch of men who haven't seen a woman in perhaps some time, you can't pretend that they're all sitting there and flipping through their Shakespeare, saying, oh yes, she played that part quite well.
We're sucking a fresh orange with juice in it. I've seen them all. Why, her acting just walks into a man's soul without knocking and takes possession of the whole ground floor.
And finally, the Victorian playhouses of the East.
I was present at her appearance at the old Fifth Avenue Theater. A woman of unusual intellect and cultivation, she electrified New York by her great art as an actress. She took hold of me as no one had before or has since.
Modjeska
sensed what the audience needed. That's another reason that she became a 19th century icon for actors in Poland and in America. Because she could read her audience. She knew how much realism was needed and how much idealism to give, and when to combine the two.
When she played evil women, such as the murderous Lady Macbeth, she always tried to find a human motive, an explanation for their malign nature and heinous deeds.
But she also wanted to play her characters so that they would be lovable. So that when she played Camille, who was a courtesan and a fallen woman, she made her so ethereal, so fine, so discerning, so genteel, that everyone approved her. To the point where William Winter, who was really the chief dramatic critic of the day, said, she's not playing Camille. But what she's playing is wonderful, so I approve it. But I don't approve anybody else playing Camille.
So there's certainly an underground sexual movement going on in the 19th century, contradicting the Victorian morality of the period. So the fallen woman, you get to have it both ways. I mean, you get to see the woman despairing because she's a moral person, but she's regretting the evil of her sexual misdeeds.
Playing the role of the fallen woman came dangerously close to exposing Modjeska's past.
She was Madame Modjeska. And in fact, many people were taken in, including journalists who you would think would have been able to find out the real scoop. But they never knew that she was illegitimate. They never knew that Ralph was illegitimate. And they thought of her as a consummate lady. And she very much treasured that. That was extremely important to her. And it was extremely important that she have this good marriage to Popovsky that she could show off to the world.
Unlike many of her peers, Modjeska understood the value of commercial photography and portraiture. Her carte de visite documented every role she played. The timing of her conquests could not have been more ideal. Modjeska entered an American theater intent on both mass circulation and cultural respectability. Both the railroad and a national network of newspapers and magazines enabled her career to soar in the United States.
She very precisely planned out when she would play Shakespeare in London in English, beginning in San Francisco. If she failed back then, nobody would have remembered her. It was not coincidental. San Francisco, then New York, and at the end, the cultural capital of Boston, and finally Europe.
Performing Shakespeare in the land of Shakespeare at the Royal Court Theatre in London was to be the greatest challenge of her life.
Shakespeare was the true love of her life.
The mysterious spirit ruling over human souls, the wonderful wizard, great imitable Shakespeare. He became my master.
To come from a foreign country and to perform in English, in England,
as she did and so applauded. A fantastic achievement.
Yet her dream would not come to pass. She had not conquered London as a Shakespearean actress.
What she really had more of a complex about was being well educated. And what her first impresario did, her first lover, her seducer, gave her was a cultural education. That was very important. He was the one who read Schiller to her. He was the one who introduced Shakespeare to her.
She dreamed about higher spheres, artistic and literary circles. That's where she felt the most content.
The Chłopowskis met some of the most cultivated people in the world, such as Lord Tennyson, the Prince of Wales, and Oscar Wilde. During her stay, Modjeska wrote a poem entitled The Artist's Dream.
The poem illustrates her continual dreams for fame, and when it finally comes, she awakens in shock and disappointment.
Oscar Wilde was so impressed with Modjeska that he included the poem in every one of his published collections. Although Modjeska hadn't received the reviews she had hoped for with her Shakespearean roles in London, she created one of the most memorable roles of her career. She transformed Mary Stuart from the historical rebel into a beautiful saint.
She was really hell-bent on proving herself as a Shakespearean actress. And it didn't matter that she had a foreign accent, she was going to try all of these things. And I think that that was maybe not a fearful experience, but it was a real risk, and I think that she was aware of it. And from the time she came back in 1882, all through the 80s, she began to build up this gallery of Shakespearean portraits and eventually convinced the critics and the public that she was really good at this, that she was the best.
She meticulously prepared every role, researching the atmosphere and historical period, such as the character of Cleopatra, the seductive enchantress of the Nile. It was the fusion of intellect and emotion and spiritualizing her characters that marked her genius.
The greatest thing about Cleopatra is that she's a character with a capacity to transform every moment of human existence into art. So even her death is a triumph of art.
She must have been a very magnetic personality, starting with the fact that she was foreign-born. It is impossible to make that kind of a career unless you have a very serious charisma, unless you are an incredible artist and also a very warm personality.
I mean, the thing that I admire her for is that she embraced who she was and put that on stage in a time when that was not truly accepted, and have that accent and yet be bold enough to say, this is who I am, and declare yourself to the world. I mean, those are the kind of personalities that become stars in the theater.
The 1880s were Modjeska's golden years. Traveling as a celebrity in her own palace car, everyone came out to view the hotel in miniature. The wagons carried 65 theatrical trunks worth over $20,000 at the time. The palace car was equipped for good living. There was a grand salon for rehearsals and interviews, a private boudoir, a bathroom and kitchen, as well as a wine cellar below. Modjeska believed that without these comforts, no actress would be able to withstand the fatigue of a series of one-night stands and do justice to her part each night. Her private car symbolized her control over her professional and personal life.
She showed American society how to be a grande dame, what kinds of hats to wear, what kinds of cigarettes to smoke.
Dressed by acclaimed fashion designers of the day, such as the father of haute couture, Charles Frederick Worth, Modjeska also designed many of her own gowns.
In contrast to some of the other actresses of her day, she was a lady, and that always showed through and gave more power to her acting, but also power to her private life.
It was believed that Sarah Bernhardt, Modjeska's contemporary rival, combined her acting career with the life of a courtesan, an eccentric on and off the stage. Modjeska chose a different path.
Modjeska was quite happy in the 1880s in the United States, because that was a period in which she was intensely active. She loved to work hard. She was completely engaged in this. I mean, she was engaged in all the aspects of production, in set design, certainly in costume design. I mean, Modjeska was responsible for most of the way her costumes looked, if not, in fact, sewing them herself. And so it was a time of wonderful productivity for her.
Actors were really known as directors in those days. Booth was known as the director of his plays, so was Modjeska. They weren't directors in our sense of director, but the actors were considered directors because they created the character and they created the whole ambience and the idea of how the play was to be staged.
The more Modjeska toured from coast to coast across America with her newly formed company and repertoire, the more people she met, poets, generals, and presidents. One of the most exotic places she visited was the old world culture of New Orleans. Its spirit of tradition and chivalry and joie de vivre reminded her of the Polish gentry. Modjeska believed that men and women of culture could be found everywhere, even in the smallest corners of the country.
There were opera houses put up in Colorado by silver barons that brought the best talent there.
The Denver Opera House was built a few years later by Mr. Tabor, and it was absolutely magnificent. Madame Modjeska would have been on that silver circuit.
Touring of the gold fields, the gold camps, was a profitable thing for most actors and actresses.
It was very hard up here. The Indians did not bring their squaws up this high because the weather was so severe.
Modjeska had given Leadville pride in their city, as well as a bit of society that people who were not well educated dreamed about. Modjeska co-starred with the handsome Maurice Barrymore. Their roles were so realistic and so passionate that audiences often wondered if they were really acting. They took the Modjeska-Barrymore troupe on the road in the 1880s. Modjeska developed a special relationship with the Barrymore children, especially little Ethel, who reminded her of the daughter she had lost.
I was only 4 years old, but I remember Madame as Rosalind and Marguerite Gautier more vividly than any memory of Douce, Bernhardt, or Ellen Terry. Both of my parents worshipped her.
In 1889, the long-anticipated collaboration became a reality. Edwin Booth and Helena Modjeska combined their talents to perform in the Booth-Modjeska Company for one spectacular season.
Our union is the realization of a dream I have long cherished. A theater in America, a house in which great actors and great actresses work together in order to educate and refine.
Modjeska's desire to create a national theater in America was never fulfilled.
She longed for the respect for a certain kind of repertoire that she was not able to quite put in place in America.
Modjeska carefully observed the changes and new trends in theater.
And she was remaking American theater, pioneering the way to be an actress and a private woman at the same time, and to be free in both cases.
They really infused American acting with something that we would really call realism. The American acting style that we have today, to this very day.
Modjeska had developed a more natural, less stylized type of acting in America.
When she was interviewed, she would be surrounded by books, that she would be seen to be dabbling in political history or in the latest novel or the latest great novel, something that was really a classic, was a testament to her constant wish for self-improvement and to prove that she was truly an intellectual. And she wanted to associate with American elites. So the fact that she was friends with Henry James was very important. The fact that she visited Henry Wadsworth Longfellow and that he accepted her. A poet was the highest form of artistry, a signature of having arrived.
The Western writer Willa Cather found the exemplification of her own lifetime ideal in Modjeska.
The artist, the attacker of life,
who drives forward one single goal, however lonely, pursuing perfection.
Modjeska is commemorated as a character in Cather's novel, My Mortal Enemy.
She looked a woman of another race in another period. When asked to propose a toast, she put out her long arm, lifted her glass, and looking into the blur of the candlelight with a grave face, said,
"To my country."
There were three artists from Poland in the 1870s known as the planets around Modjeska's son, who retained a deep admiration and love for her long after she had left for America. Painter Witkiewicz, whose art and architectural designs had drawn her to the Polish Tatry Mountains of Zakopane, a place of refuge when visiting her native Poland. The artist Helmoński, whose internationally renowned art symbolized the lyrical countryside of Poland, his paintings keeping her native country alive for Modjeska. And Chmielowski, a gifted painter who founded the Order of Albertine Brothers and Sisters. He was one of the earliest inspirations for the future Pope John Paul II, who later canonized him as Brother Albert.
Each time Modjeska visited Poland, she met with Brother Albert in Krakow and in his place of seclusion. We know that she brought him money and supported his humanitarian work for the poor and homeless.
He tried to convince Modjeska that the theatre was a man-made idea and that it was concealing her from worshipping her true God.
Modjeska was too much of a realist to feel that she needed to give it all up and to go begging for the church. I mean, she thought that through her earnings, she could support the church very handsomely. And she gave very much to the church. And I mean, there was no fortune to be had after she died. As she writes, actually, to one of her California friends, she said, I can't be praying, I have to be doing. She also worried, I think, about maintaining her reputation in Poland, because she did not want to seem as if she had somehow vulgarized her craft in playing for these barbaric Yankees. So she would go back. I mean, she went back 5 times to Poland, but she wanted to prove that she was still the great actress that had left in 1876. And she managed to convince them each time.
Yet one of her visits to Russian-occupied Warsaw had ended in tragedy, when high school students presented her with a red and white banner symbolic of the forbidden Polish flag. They were expelled. In a heroic gesture, one of the students committed suicide in order for the others to be reinstated. The funeral of Ignacy Neufeld, a Polish Jew, was the scene of a demonstration not seen in Poland since the 1863 insurrection. 10,000 Poles and Jews attended. Modjeska laid down a wreath similar to the one presented to her and returned to England.
Her eyes had a faraway look, as though she were thinking about the wrongs of Poland, wrongs she never forgot.
She was plagued by bad dreams. She was plagued by dreams of thinking that she was somehow in battle with the Russians, that if you left the nation, you were defecting from the nation, you weren't serving the nation. And that's why it was so important for her to say, no, no, I am being an ambassador for the nation. I'm being a kind of, as I call her, a kind of artist-missionary, that I am going and touting the Polish cause elsewhere. I'm pleading it even to senators and to presidents in the United States, and I'm proving to the world that Polish culture is among the first of European cultures by my acting and my prowess. And as she wrote to a close friend, she said, I'm not ready to be a Polish Joan of Arc.
Modjeska had a toughness inside her. She never lowered her standards or changed her behavior, even when she had to work physically hard for a living. Yet, on the other hand, she was extremely flexible, adapting to the various environments in which she found herself.
She writes a great deal about how America doesn't completely fulfill her, that it doesn't spiritually renew her, that she feels like she's playing the same thing on the road again and again.
When I am in America, I feel like I am living with only one lung, breathing with only one lung. I don't have the inspiration that I would have if I was playing in Poland.
On the other hand, when she was in Warsaw, she said the same thing. She said, I'm being stifled here. I need to go to some other place where I can, sort of make my own choices and have my own companies. So I think that she was haunted in all of the places that she lived.
The endless tours, the long sea voyages, the substandard conditions of the stage and backstage in many American theaters, and the celebrity publicity had all taken their toll. Modjeska longed for a home to which she could escape.
The key to my whole existence is my dependence on harmony.
In 1888, Modjeska purchased a ranch in Southern California.
Carol, it can be real. It's like a stage setting. It's Arden, a real Arden, with everything Shakespeare talked about in As You Like It.
Her home in Arden, her house in Santiago Canyon, is a symbol of her persona, her soul, especially the garden.
The private residence was to become an enlargement of an existing home belonging to the Pleasants, pioneers that Helena and Karol first met when in Anaheim. It was designed by Stanford White, one of the most prominent New York architects of the century, a combination of old-world culture and American West interior design, surrounded with gardens of native plants.
Two realities, the real and the theatrical, seem to overlap one another. A perfect example of this was the fact that she named her mysterious and wild hideaway Arden. On one hand, it's a strange place filled with corpses, with bandits hiding in nearby mountains. On the other hand, it's Arden. There's a connection between literature and reality. These worlds often overlapped in her.
She was stunned by how beautiful California was, and she found a particular peace when she was at Arden.
She loved the mountains, the attempt to reach the top, to challenge oneself, to overcome difficulties, how to experience silence. Respecting nature was very important to her.
These people don't lose their dream when the colony fails. Something goes on in their lives, and they perpetuate a certain level of idealism.
It was in silence and prayer that she found solace and strength.
I think she couldn't have acted Shakespeare without knowing a lot about love. And I think to her that love was probably a really central thing to life, and it was something that nature had, probably in her view, nature had been created for and was kind of an extension of love. But I think she understood the support that love can give, as well as the damage that love can cause.
Her son's illegitimacy remained her most painful and closely guarded secret.
He was the true love of her life, that she loved Rudolph, who then became Ralph, and whom she called Dolcio, the sweet one, that she loved him very, very much.
She was overprotective of him, and she lost a lot because of this. When Ralph's father, Ziemeyer, kidnapped him as a boy, she spent many years trying to buy her son back from his own father.
She was also very invested in him doing well. And she was proud of the fact that he was wise, that he was able to play chess so well, that he was doing well in school, that he became virtually a concert pianist or that quality. So she was proud of all these things, then proud of his later career, and was very supportive of him.
Schooled in Paris at one of the highest-ranking engineering universities in the world, Ralph became a prominent bridge builder in America.
She never gave him independence and therefore stifled him as a person. Modjeska actually raised his wife for him by keeping the girl secluded in a convent in England,
so that she would remain pure and not be seduced, as she herself had been.
When Ralph and Felicia were married, Modjeska knew she could no longer control her son's life.
It was a very well-staged wedding. It happened in New York. They had their wedding in a Polish church, and then for the wedding breakfast, they went to Delmonico's. So it was this wonderful combination of highbrow New York and her Polish roots.
From the time of my son's marriage, I began to pass through a painful crisis. From the enticing Madame Helena, as I was called, I would slowly become a dignified matron and later grandmother. To change from a butterfly to a lover.
Ralph and Felicia gave Modjeska 3 grandchildren, to whom she offered many life lessons at Arden. One of these was a gift in the form of a fantasy fairy tale, written and beautifully illustrated in ink and watercolor by Modjeska. The story showed Modjeska's love for children, animals, and the natural world.
The last decade that she was very active, in the 90s, she became a spokesperson for actresses. In fact, people looked to her as the senior figure who could then give talks at the 12th Night Club, which was a club exclusively for actresses. The actress is not close to the prostitute. The actress is an artist.
In 1893, Modjeska was asked to give a speech on women in the true drama at the Chicago World's Fair. Further celebrating American progress, she was then asked to speak at the World's Congress of Representative Women, attracting 500 delegates from 27 countries.
Modjeska appeared as a representative for Polish women, since the delegation from Warsaw was forbidden to attend.
When our men, exhausted by wars and defeats, became despondent and disheartened, it was the Polish woman who stood like a guardian angel at the door of their consciences. It was she who taught her sons how to defy our enemies.
The speech protested Poland's repression and upheld Polish women as the staunch patriots of the nation. She would pay a high price for her words.
I think she had a great deal of political courage, and to openly defy people that had tremendous power is courageous, obviously, and she did it.
She lost the most lucrative contract of her life from a financial standpoint: Petersburg, Moscow, and Odessa. The Russians had their informants at the Congress, and her speech was officially published. The Russian Tsar decreed a zakaz, and Modjeska was forbidden to return to Russian-occupied Poland.
For a woman to do what she did in her time was considered pretty radical. I think if she were alive today, she'd be very much a feminist, very much leading young women to take independent careers.
Many, many women admired her and sort of fell in love with her. And I'm not necessarily talking about any lesbian sexuality, but that they saw her as either self-reflection or as role model, and they saw her as this essential good woman that they wanted to be. And she formed very fast female friendships, and one of her closest friendships was with Annie Fields, who was the wife of James Fields, who was the publisher of The Atlantic.
When Modjeska began to experiment with her repertoire, such as in the Heinrich Sudermann play Magda, Annie Fields appreciated her making choices that were a bit more avant-garde, especially when it came to the representation of women.
And she came to see her in Boston in Magda. Modjeska writes to Annie Fields and says, "You understand me, and I thank you so much. I value your words far more than any critical review, because you know what I'm doing."
Modjeska showed her embrace of the new woman, who could be a professional and even fallen at one time, and yet live and play on. The status of women and sexuality had changed. Her character in Ibsen's A Doll's House was very controversial at the time.
It was a brave role to play and brave role to introduce to America. That play got very ghastly reviews in most of Europe where it was played, and it was thought almost unthinkable, almost unplayable, to show a woman leaving her husband and her family without criticizing her at the end of the play.
She was someone who believed in advancing the profession socially, and that was very, very important, so that actors were really the equivalent of other professionals in America, and she could see America adored the professions, that, you know, to be a professional was to be somebody. But she certainly did believe that women should have equal rights. And she was a great inspiration to the generation that came right after her, people like Minnie Mattern-Fisk and Julia Marlowe, who were impresarios in their own right.
Modjeska was influential in the forming of Orange County, when the bill to separate Los Angeles County from its southern counterpart, to be called Orange, was to be passed in Sacramento in 1889. Judge Montgomery purchased 20 tickets for Modjeska's As You Like It performance and marked them complimentary. The bill was quickly passed, and the meeting adjourned in order for all the senators to attend the rare performance by the celebrity actress Modjeska, who was in town, as headlined all over the Sacramento newspapers. Her performances at the Grand Opera House, later known as French's, were considered the most notable ever given in Orange County.
Everybody used to come to the Mason Opera House. When the orchestra would start playing, the footlights would come up on the curtain, and then the curtain either went up or parted. There is nothing in the world that can top that sensation you have.
Modjeska and her husband entertained many guests at their ranch house, attempting to recreate the salons held at their home in Warsaw. They visited the Jock family, the original owners of the Hotel Laguna. They were often guests of the all-powerful Judge Egan at San Juan by the Sea Hotel, who invited them to bullfights and Mexican dinners with the Forster family. It was on one such occasion that she received the devastating news.
I remember we were all sitting on the front veranda of the hotel when a messenger rode up. He gave Madame the news of the murder of her foreman by one of the workers at the ranch. She rose from her chair with her eyes to the heavens and made the sign of the cross.
The people of the town then decided to take the law into their own hands and instigated a lynching.
Never on stage could this great actress portray such sorrow and grief.
Modjeska fought all her life against the lack of compassion in the world. She became known as a redeemer of the oppressed. Her first and last performances involved charity work to help victims of disasters. She shed no tears after her San Francisco triumph, yet wept for orphaned children. Modjeska had contributed to the Actors Fund to safeguard the future of actors in America. She gave a benefit performance for an actress friend of hers who had fallen on hard times.
At the end of it, she brought the actress up on stage, and the actress approached her shyly and reached out and grabbed Modjeska's hand and kissed it. Modjeska, at that moment, pulled her hand away before she could kiss it.
The audience gasped, thinking that the woman had overstepped herself.
And then Modjeska threw her arms wide, clasped her in a tight hug, and kissed her twice on the mouth. And the newspapers afterwards said it was the biggest ovation that they'd heard in San Francisco theatrical history.
Modjeska and her husband were quite fond of artist colonies in California, such as the Bohemian Club in San Francisco and the Laguna Beach colony. Her favorite hideaway was Anna Held's Green Dragon colony in La Jolla. The goddess of art would descend from her Olympian peak to remain in the mystic, cosmic room of the Ark. Modjeska and her husband spent many musical evenings visiting Anna and her guests. One memorable day, Modjeska and the Count had the pleasure of entertaining the doll Olive Mishap, given to Anna Held by the English actress Ellen Terry. Anna received a letter from Olive describing the trip.
We had to wait in El Tara for the belated train that brought us a gentleman, Count Bojenta. He treated me with the greatest respect, lifting me into the carriage where I rested during the drive to Fairyland.
Madame Modjeska and her maid dressed many Victorian dolls in pieces of her stage costumes and then raffled them off at church bazaars in Santa Ana.
She was somebody who wanted very much to help her compatriots in the United States, and she wanted to help them better themselves. She would give money for Polish schools, and she wanted them to both preserve Polish culture but also integrate into American culture.
Modjeska also had an awareness of American politics and its impact on society, such as the assassination of President McKinley in 1901.
When McKinley died, Modjeska was actually sick. She had an inflammation of the throat, and she wrote in this letter at the time to a friend how she had to restore that organ of communication between Shakespeare and the mob.
The president's assassin was of Polish ancestry, and this fact deeply troubled Modjeska.
She would gladly have given up her own voice in order to exchange it for President McKinley's health, if that had been possible.
As she got older and had bouts of ill health, Modjeska was more and more afraid of making ends meet for all the various people and causes she was supporting.
She struggled with death much of her life. In Warsaw, she had typhus. In America, she was partly paralyzed. Lying in a hospital in San Francisco, she writes to Karol,
I didn't realize that I could not pray by myself as deeply as when we pray together.
I think she really, really loved Popovsky because he was such a confidant. He was such a support for her. And her life in America was lonely. I mean, her life was constantly traveling on railroad trains from gig to gig. When he was with her, she had someone who was on her intellectual level, who could talk shop all the time and could talk about other things and could talk about Poland. And that was very important to her. And it was very rare that they were ever apart. They had a very modern marriage. I mean, he really did compromise in many ways for her, and he became her partner.
My husband's influence over my inner self, the touch of a delicate nature and a refined mind, never tired of instructing and polishing the rough edges of the too impulsive and somewhat violent disposition I brought with me into the world. The true Christian spirit, which had always ruled his life, had a great power over me. The improvement of my nature was due to his constant soul watching over me.
Here, Modjeska shows great class, her soul, her real nature, someone capable of giving love to another.
Sienkiewicz reflected on her gentleness.
He knew her soul well because he loved her very deeply and was close to her. She could be easily hurt, easily touched, easily offended, as if she had to be carefully tuned in order for her to produce a sound or a melody.
The most perfect compliment, according to Modjeska, that she had ever received came from a 7-year-old boy. He said to her, "I love you. You are like music." Joseph Hoffman was to become a world-renowned pianist.
There were two great names, Paderewski and Hoffman. She actually opened the doors for them. Paderewski was very grateful to Modjeska for introducing him to the artistic elite of the East and the West coasts.
Paderewski was the last prominent guest to visit Modjeska at Arden. He begged her to sell the ranch and move from the wilderness. Paderewski arranged a testimonial performance for Modjeska at the Metropolitan Opera House of New York, attended by Mark Twain, Andrew Carnegie, and many well-known actors of the American stage.
There is something more valuable in actors' life than applause or material success, having retained a place in the minds and hearts of those whose approval is the real sanction of any work.
Modjeska became one of the many American leaders of her time who advanced the country, contributing to its growth and development. Modjeska and her husband moved to secluded Bay Island in Newport Beach. The island was renamed Modjeska Island, although she referred to it as her Little Arden.
When I sit on the porch of our cottage, looking at the purple hills of the Santa Ana and the peaks of the Sierra Madre, blue waters of the bay, I feel calm and contented. No bitterness disturbs my mind, but gratitude for all that I have received from God and man.
Helena Modjeska died of Bright's disease in 1909. A large black private railroad car was sent to East Newport to meet the cortege carrying the coffin across the small white wooden bridge from Bay Island. Thousands lined the streets of Los Angeles to watch her funeral. Later, her body crossed the Atlantic one last time, to be buried in Krakow, the city of her birth.
She never became anything, anywhere, but exactly what she was at the beginning.
Sienkiewicz referred to her as a dove with the wings of an eagle.
As a descendant of Modjeska, the idea that what she was is carried genetically on through succeeding generations is extremely important to me. And we have the opportunity every day when we get up in the morning to be Modjeska, to carry on her legacy.
Her life in Europe and in America represented a fragment of the great theatrical era of 19th century Romanticism.
In perfecting thy soul, thou hast perfected the soul of humanity.
My name and fame will soon disappear, but there is only one link between us: art.